Hi, my name's Gail Harker, and I'd love to welcome you to my channel. And as well, I'd like to introduce myself. I founded Gail Harker Creative Studies Center in about 1994 in Washington State, and particularly for teaching London City and Guilds programs for embroidery, art and design that's specific to embroidery. And since that time, I've had hundreds of people come through my door. And I was fortunate enough to have Penny Peters, who is our guest speaker today and is going to show us about Tangled Threads of Life. But Penny has had a background, as we all have at a particular age. We have many things we've done in our life, but she has a BA from the University of California, Davis, and this is in social studies and the arts. She added the London City and Guilds diploma in 2004 when she attended our center and continued to study her arts in this particular way. And so Penny is going to talk about kind of the behind the scenes of how to do an embroidery. And one of the things that we're really keen to do is to really show people, show students how to see the background, how to work, how to be a little disciplined, not a little, but sometimes a lot disciplined, and work through various ways of getting to a resolved end when you're working with art and design and then translating it into embroidery. The project that Penny's going to talk about is the Tangled Threads of Life. It was about when she was excited about working for a community project called 25 Million Stitches. She decided she was going to contribute a panel to that particular purpose. And so in this video, she shows the various aspects of making the panel and behind the scenes of how, why do you choose this? How long does it take? All of those other things that maybe aren't so evident when you see these lovely polished finished embroideries and then you'll see the finished result. I just am really excited to have her with me today. Good morning, Penny. I mean, we're usually together in different circumstances, usually in the classroom, but it's so much fun to invite you to talk about your panel that you actually made for a project and to tell a little bit more about it. Because to the people who are just not sure, have never made a piece before, it's a pretty exciting adventure. And to hear it explained is lovely. So, Penny, I'm going to show the whole panel, and then you can tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to talk about this because it was a project that started from heart.
Started from your heart, and how did you get inspired to do this particular panel, and where did it go? And just tell us more about what the project was.
Well, in early 2020, I happened upon a Facebook announcement for a global stitch project called 25 Million Stitches. The artist, California artist who put it together was Jennifer Kim Song. And she had, in the year prior, learned that there were 25 million refugees in the world. Refugee being defined as someone who had to flee their country to avoid war, famine, drought, genocide, all the myriad of things that happen that cause people to migrate. This number does not count the number of people displaced within a country, only the people fleeing their countries. And at that time, in early 2020, we were seeing images of people from Syria fleeing the civil war there and from other countries. So this was a nightly news thing. I had been really emotionally touched and feeling quite helpless about the plight of so many people in the world fleeing so many, almost many man-made difficulties. So I was immediately interested in trying to think about joining this project. First, because I was feeling helpless about the refugees. Second, because you and I had just been talking about community projects to depict a story, thing that is so old. I mean, really beginning with the Bayeux Tapestry, shortly after the 1066 invasion of England from William of Normandy. And that project has been commemorated in the Bayeux Tapestry, which still amazingly exists. So I was interested in joining a community and particularly a global art project. So this project just called out to me to join.
Okay, so what did you have to do? And what made you think that stitches can make a difference? I mean, you talked a little bit about the history of how stitches have been used to commemorate wars and sort of important events. When it gets right down to it, and you think, okay, especially in our day and age, you think, well, okay, what can a stitch do? What kind of impact might it have?
Well, let me start with Jennifer Song. She was extremely disturbed by this 25 million refugee issue. And she began to think about how she could make a mark for each of 25 million people. And because she's an artist, she actually began on paper. And then she could see how long it would take a single individual to make 25 marks on paper. Eventually, her idea migrated to 25 million stitches, one each stitch representing one of the refugees. So she began on her own, and there again, the monumental nature of 25 million stitches, she could see she would need help. So she began enlisting people locally to try to help. And eventually, which is how I happened on the project, globally, in inviting people globally to participate in making 25 million stitches that would represent each of 25 million refugees in the world at the time. I just happened upon this. It was a Facebook posting, and I was immediately called to join because stitching is something I love. And to think that I might make a difference with my needle and thread really helped me feel like I could contribute something.
It's an amazing thought. And so, just for the people who are watching, they know you're not new to stitching. No matter where you start on a project, it is new to you at each stage. It's a new beginning whenever you start a new project. So, okay, the impact of the refugees is really startling and it's really difficult. And of course, it has our empathy and, trying to understand what it's about. But as an artist, how did you then say, okay, I have this feeling about how it is to be these people in this plight. I now have to divorce myself into being an artist and to portraying it. So, how did you go about doing that?
Well, what was interesting about this is that the minute I happened on Jennifer's global invitation to join the project, in my mind's eye, I saw a line of refugees. We were seeing these images on nightly news. I think I mentioned that before. And so then when I thought, okay, how could I contribute to the project? I thought about different things. And finally, I went right back to my original image in my mind's eye of this line of refugees needing to leave their country. So then, as you say, how to convert this image to a needlework project? I began by looking for images of individual people that could make up my line of refugees. And I have to say that I'm not somebody who is used to doing a lot of figure drawing, and I didn't have much confidence in my talent or ability to do this in a fashion that might be readable by others. So I began to look for images and I began to draw from those images that I found online. And I made a series of drawings on tracing paper that I could cut apart and put together in different ways to see if I could get a line of people that looked realistic, fairly realistic, and that changed in height and scale so that the first people in the line would be the largest, and then they would diminish in size, kind of trailing back to give a
So
sense of movement.
from this lady, she would be the larger one.
He is the largest one. She's about 11 inches tall.
And so did they kind of dwindle in height as you
Well, I
receded?
made them dwindle. I
Uh-huh.
scaled them down
Okay.
so that they would dwindle.
Yeah. Well, it's always a challenge to show a kind of a perspective, even though we don't totally work in perspective with some of these needlework projects, but to kind of give a feeling of dimensionality, which is so interesting to do. In fact, I'm going to go back into your tracings again. Oh, well, how long is it, Penny? How long is this piece?
Well, this piece of fabric arrived in the mail. It was 15 inches in height and 31, I think, inches in width. So that's the piece of fabric I had. And I could use the whole length, the whole 32, 31 inches, but the 15-inch height could not change. Well, horizontally, that fit my idea really well of this line of refugees. So, of course, I began designing with a horizontal orientation. And as I mentioned, I cut these drawings apart so that I could move them around and get a pleasing line of people. And what I mean by a pleasing line of people, certainly on the individual pieces of paper, I could vary the position that they were in the line. I could vary how close they were to one another. And so I played musical chairs with these drawings until I got a progression of people that I thought looked interesting and conveyed the sense of travel and fleeing and baggage and escape.
Yeah, it's all in these little drawings. All of the story is in them. The body positions, the little boy holding something in his hand, the bags, carrying the children in different positions, carrying the luggage. So much is told in stories by our body position. What are we doing in that position? And you've really varied them. This one, I think, really gives a true impact of what that fabric actually looked like. Talk about that fabric a little bit more. There's probably people who are stitching out there thinking, oh my goodness, what is she using for fabric? What is it?
Well, this is the fabric I was sent by the project. It turned out to be a fairly loosely woven, unbleached cotton muslin. It worked well for me. It still had the sizing on it. It was requested that we not back the fabric at all, that the stitching on the back be visible.
I thought it was remarkably light. I saw the fabric. I thought it was remarkably light.
Well, I
Not
thought it
not
was,
really like a linen at all.
oh no, not like a linen at all.
Mhm.
Gail, you and I had just been working with a group of students on using straight stitch as a filling stitch in our Cantha project. And I decided that what I would do on this fairly light fabric was to see if I could actually use that technique, straight stitch as a filling stitch, to fill in these figures. So the first thing I did was transfer the images to fabric. This cotton was very almost see-through, so it was a very easy task to take the drawings I had made, put them underneath the fabric, and put the whole business on a portable light box I have. And I just then, in light pencil, transferred the drawing underneath to the top of the fabric so that I could work with the images. And you can see I didn't put much detail in, I just put the outlines in.
At this point, maybe it's an idea to tell them how many stitch types you actually used on this to portray this story. Because you talked about the one that is running stitch, which is the one for this blue garment. And then there's another one in this particular area that looks like it's some other stitch here.
Well, I think that's a double running stitch. So
Okay. Yeah.
I started with a running stitch, and then I decided that it needed a more solid line. So I went back the other way and just filled in the gaps in the running stitch here.
I think we can really see in this picture as well that there's running stitch and there's running stitch. For instance, when we were doing the Cantha work in the class, we showed 6 different ways to do a running stitch, which are all different. This particular running stitch doesn't show a lot of the in-between fabric, does it?
No, and that was the idea of using running stitch as a filling stitch. Because what can be done is to vary the amount of fabric between the stitches. So I tried to make that amount very small. And then the other thing that can be done is to vary the distance between the stitch rows. So these stitch rows are fairly close together, not always close together, but fairly close together. And the third thing you can do is vary the stitch direction. So, like on the sleeves of her arms, I have tried to vary that straight stitch in a way that makes her arms appear rounded. And in the pleats of her shawl, I've tried to make it look as though this were fabric that was flowing. On the basket that she's carrying, the other stitch that you see there in the body of the basket, it is a running stitch, but then I have gone back through the running stitch, whipped another thread through that, a slightly lighter thread than the original thread color, because this was a wicker basket I was trying to portray.
Penny and I, when we're working, we usually will document most of the work in photographs, but the photographs aren't always intended to be professional. And so sometimes we have photos that are not quite as good as maybe we would like them. Like this one is a little bit blurry because I insisted upon getting it larger just so people can see the stitches because we love to look at stitches. So we think, okay, people will as well. At least people who stitch will enjoy looking at them. And so you've done other things with these pictures as well, Penny. Let's think about the threads. What were you using for threads in this?
I was using 2 strands of embroidery floss. I just kind of extemporaneously stitched the first woman in line. Each figure ended up being a little problem I had to solve. So I had to think about the colors. I had to think about how to mark out the different garments they were wearing and maybe create shadows. So the green man on the left, his forward foot is in lighter colors of green than the one toward the back. On his jacket, I've tried to do a little bit of shadow, darker thread under the rim of that jacket to show that it's over the other green garment. Standing back and looking at these figures, each individually, trying to solve the problems that I had set for myself when I so cavalierly just drew them quickly.
Right. What about the color scheme for the whole piece? Did you choose a color scheme for the entire piece when you started? How did you go about that?
Actually, not. I knew that I would not be using bright, cheerful colors because this is not a bright, cheerful project that I was trying to create. So I knew that I would choose a fairly muted color palette. And so I used colors that were not pure, happy, bright colors, but were more muted and grayed. And that was my intention.
And so, if somebody else had have done a project, they might have had a whole different way of expressing themselves. And that,
Yes, and I think you'll be able to see that when we get toward the end and I'm showing the
yeah,
exhibit.
which is lovely because it shows individualism so nicely. Here's a close up of that same one that we have so people can see the stitches. Of course, the stitches aren't really that big. And as you said, you used 2 strands of thread in there. Oh, something else I notice you've done on these. I don't know if you've always done it, but you've occasionally outlined them in black. And I think you told me there was a reason for that.
Well, there was. When I got a couple of the figures done, they really weren't standing out from the fabric in a way that I wanted to see them. I wanted to see them standing out. So I went back in and outlined each of the figures in a single strand now of black thread. And that helped the colors stand out from the background of the fabric because many of the colors, as you can see, are light enough that without the outline, they would just fade back into the fabric.
Okay, so that brings me to the next question, Penny. Did you use a hoop?
I did not use a hoop. I stitched in my hand.
Okay.
The sizing that was on the muslin when it came made the muslin felt a little crisp. And so one of the things that I needed to be careful of is to be sure that the stitches were laying comfortably on the fabric and not pulled tight because I did not want to feel any tension that might draw the fabric in as I was stitching. I'm careful about how the tension worked.
Here's something else. You said, oh, when I looked at it, I could see it needed a better outline because you couldn't really see it. How did you view it from a distance as if somebody else might view it rather than just in your lap? How did
Well, what I actually did every night after I completed the stitching was to spread the fabric out on the back of my couch because it was fabric that adhered to the fabric of the couch and didn't fall off. So I was able to get a good visual view of the whole thing. And in the morning, when I got up, I would walk around and approach the couch from a distance. And that's how I viewed this. Other people might pin it up to a wall. I didn't have a handy wall at the time that I could pin it up to. So that was how I distanced myself enough from the actual piece to be able to view it.
when did you stitch on it? At what point in time? Morning, lunch?
I I stitched every night after the evening news, and I would be watching or listening to something on television or a book on tape. And I would sit and I would stitch every evening. So I had artificial light, which gave me a fairly even light in which to work. And I probably averaged maybe 3.5 hours of stitching every evening. And once I started, I so looked forward to being able to stitch and listen to whatever I was listening to that I could hardly wait for the evening news to be over and for my dinner to be over and then to start stitching.
Because that was your routine.
That was my routine.
What was your deadline for getting this piece in?
Well, I began the moment I got the piece of fabric, which was around the 1st of February in 2020. And the deadline for submission, I believe, was mid May. So I stitched every single night. And what a joy that was. I figured I stitched for approximately 100 nights, 3.5 hours each night, average. Some nights less, some nights more. The fabric was so easy to stitch through that it allowed my poor arthritic fingers an ability to work at that level without worsening the arthritis. My gosh, it was just a joy to be able to do this.
So, how many hours do you think you actually stitched, or did you say that?
Oh, well, more or less 350 hours, I would say.
Right. So, people who don't stitch are sometimes aghast at, like, oh my goodness, how much time you've used without thinking how much time we use on other things like computers or other things. But Penny, how did you forecast that you would have enough time to finish your project so that you planned that project in a meaningful way, not getting to the halfway down the line and the deadline was next week?
Well, that's why I stitched every night. I could see in each figure how much progress I was making, and I could kind of estimate how much coverage I was getting and how long it would take me to do one figure. It took me 3 or 4 days to do each figure.
Well,
So several days to do each figure.
a good London City and Guild students you are, estimate it, put it on paper, and try to work to it, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so we come to the next one, and it's really a lovely example of how the stitches curve around. We haven't really thought about the fact that maybe some people are watching don't really understand what the cantha is or what the running stitch is, and whether you used a fabric or you counted the fabric threads or not. So maybe you just tell a little bit about that, what the fabric was like.
Well, this fabric was, as I mentioned, it was lightweight. It was not the kind of fabric in which you would count threads. In fact, I don't enjoy counted thread work very much because it's quite tedious for me. But I found that just running the needle up and down through the fabric, making the little bite of fabric very small between the stitches, was quite easy to do. It felt almost meditative. And since I already had the design drawn in there, the only decisions I really needed to make were color choices and directionality of the stitches. For me, there was not a lot of active thinking about this. I just would start stitching. Most of the stitches are vertical, but sometimes there's directionality. For example, in the boys' shorts are running horizontally, whereas t-shirt stitches are running vertically. In the woman's headscarf, I tried to make those stitches look as though the fabric were flowing over her shoulder.
You've worked a lot of projects in your lifetime. Usually you would start with color in your background, plan your design in your background and your color. And even though you're seeing a little bit of light in this particular slide we're looking at, it was just the way that the light caught it. But you're really working with a sort of an off-white fabric. What was that like to work with no background? How did that feel, considering that's not really a way in which you might have worked?
It just felt quite freeing not to be working against background color. And that actually worked really well with my first vision of the line of refugees. Another way to depict refugees would also maybe depicting the rubble behind them that they were leaving. But I really wanted these refugees to stand out. And so a very plain white background was ideal.
So here we are. You now have got all the refugees stitched?
I do, but they're walking on air. So,
Well, sure,
so
surely.
the stitches at the bottom underneath the lead woman's feet were my first thoughts about putting in a ground. The figures need to be not walking on air, they need to be grounded. So my first thought was, okay, they are walking a rocky path. This is not easy. I did a couple of lines of stitches down there to try to think about rough ground. And I thought about putting rocks in and all these sorts of things. And eventually I thought maybe this kind of chaotic ground would detract from the actual refugees themselves. So I took those stitches out. I gave up on that idea and I worked another idea, which is a narrow path. Narrow in that it would seem to be kind of a dangerous, narrow thing that you had to keep your feet on. You can see that I just, again, worked straight lines of stitches, this time much further apart than I worked in the fabric of the clothing. This is not a very solid stitching. I saw the precipice, the edge nearest the bottom of the fabric. I thought, and how can I depict this looking like a precipice? So this was my idea about sort of a cliff that had folds and wrinkles, and you got a sense of downward motion as if it were a precipice.
We also now have got some symbolism coming into it that really tells who these people are, but gives them so much other parts to the story of that precipice that we're starting to feel in here. I think it might have been a little startling to think about where are they walking on that line. Well, they're already planned, so they're already on there. So you would be doing the line behind them.
Exactly. So I needed to figure out where the path would be and how it would go.
You've got the ground, and the last pictures we saw, you didn't have anything in the sky. At what point did you think you're going to start making clouds? Because all of a sudden we've got clouds here.
Well, we do. And that was, again, the back of my couch told me as I looked at the people on their now precarious path away from danger. The top of the fabric looked empty. And I wanted to convey a feeling that they were leaving a chaotic and turmoiled past. And my thought was, okay, so let's make clouds, but let's have them be dark and ominous and roiling, like you might see thunderclouds. So I started with that. And of course, color choices needed to be grays and blacks to give that ominous feel.
So it's really obvious now that we've got the ground, the precipice, and the clouds, and the people in between, that distancing, the feeling of the height coming down a little bit, that we're getting some feeling of a little bit of dimensionality going on here, and more symbolism with this. Where are we headed? Are we headed into somewhere better, hopefully?
Well, hopefully, I meant to convey that the path begins to widen as the figures move to the right, and the clouds are lightening as the refugees move away from the chaos they are fleeing. So I'm hoping that it conveys a little bit of hope for a better future than the past that they are marching away from.
Since we're talking so much about planning a project and stitching a project and getting it done in the right amount of time, why don't we just talk about why you made a decision to do with the faces and what you did with them, how you thought about that?
Well, The scale of the pieces and the type of stitch I was using made it obvious to me that I could not put much detail in the face. So if the woman is 11 inches tall, her face might be an inch tall, and the type of stitching I was using did not lend itself to a lot of detail. The eyes needed to be there for everyone. And in some cases, there was a mustache or the suggestion of a mouth, but mostly it was just the eyes, and that was it.
Mhm. But here,
Well, here we are at the exhibit.
where
The
is this?
the first exhibit was held in Sacramento between mid-June and mid-August of 2021 at a place called the Verge Center. And the pieces were sewn into long banners that were hung from the ceiling. There are 2,200 panels that were submitted to the project. There were 2,300 stitchers, 2,200 panels, 37 countries, and from all 50 states. It was quite an amazing experience to walk among these panels and to see all of the images that had been collected from all over the world, depicting all kinds of things. Originally, Jennifer's thought had been that people would just do straight stitches across the length of the fabric. But of course, no. All of the people who were moved to participate in this project contributed their own sense of design. Some used words, some used symbols and images, some symbolized hope, some symbolized circles. There were people, there were just so many different images. In fact, I would encourage you to go to the 25 Million Stitches website. We'll put a link on that can lead you to that. And there's a place where you can look at each image that was submitted. But what I can say about standing among all of these images was extremely moving and overwhelming and just humbling to think that so many people were moved in the way that I was to contribute to this really important project.
Do you know if people are still contributing to it, or do you think they've closed it off?
I think that donations of stitching are closed, but certainly donations to help support the project as it travels from venue to venue are welcome. And there is a protected donation link on the 25 Million Stitches website. It is currently not hanging anywhere. Its next move will be to a small venue in Syracuse, New York. And Jennifer is currently traveling in Europe looking for international venues that would be willing to host the project. So the project is ongoing, although the stitching is finished for now.
So maybe somebody who's watching has a venue that might want to invite them to hang their exhibit, which would be
Oh, that would be lovely,
tremendous. Yeah,
because visibility of this project is meant to move people to action. And I think it certainly will do that wherever it is hanging.
your panel has moved now to a number of places. They must have pinned them together, did they? So that they
Yeah,
were like one, two, three.
yes, they actually
Yeah.
sewed them together. They put the ones that had the most intricate stitching and the ones that had words and messages that needed to be read at eye level, and others that were sort of all over stitching were at the top. This venue where I've taken these photographs had a 20-foot tall ceiling. So these panels were probably oh, 18 feet in length. So looking up, it was sometimes difficult to see what the top images were, but it was very easy to read and walk among the images that were placed at eye level.
Well, here we are. Now, this is who knows where the journey of your panel will go on this incredible 25 million stitch project. There it is. And I just say, people who are watching, and some may never have stitched, some may be seasoned stitchers. What kind of advice would you give somebody if they'd said, you know what, I'd like to try that? And even if I just make like a person all by itself, just for myself, or it could be for a project, what would you say to them, Penny?
Oh, golly. Well, I would say start with an image that really inspires you. It might be a person, it might be a flower, it might be a camping tent. It might be something that comes from your memory that you feel close to and inspires you. And then, of course, it's important to figure out how to get that image from your inspiration down on paper. It's lovely to make a series of drawings. And I always make more than one so that I can choose among the ones that maybe convey the feeling that I want. If you're like me and you're not a drafts person, accomplished sketcher, you do what you can do and you make the best image you can, and then you transfer it to a fabric, often just like I did. If you don't have a portable light box, you can take the fabric to the window, put the image underneath so that you have light coming from the back, and you can just lightly pencil draw, and then it's choosing colors and starting to stitch. Running
You know,
stitch is the easiest
mm,
stitch of all. It's not complicated and easy to fill spaces, although it does take a lot of stitches, which was my goal. I was wanting to contribute to 25 million.
so, Penny, you and I both really like to encourage people to try some stitching, see what it's about. There's just more and more scientific information about how the brain reacts to this type of situation of picking up a needle and stitching and doing this type of work. What would you say about what kind of feeling do you get from stitching?
From me, it's very calming and therapeutic because I'm replicating the same movements. So it becomes kind of automatic. And I am focusing on what I am doing, and the chaos of the world fades into the background. And I'm in the immediate moment of my hand, my movement, my stitch, the color choices I'm making. It's very satisfying, and I cannot describe how time just flies by. Pleasant, happy, calming time, or something is coming to being in my hands.
It is quite a creative process. And so I hope we haven't meditated everybody to sleep now. Thank you so much, Penny, for joining me in another way today. I really do appreciate it. And I think our viewers will too.
What a pleasure it is for me to be here with you and to talk about this particular stitch project, which has been close to my heart.
Okay. Thank you, Penny.